The last topic in this unit is reverberation. Reverberation is created typically in a concert hall or a large room by reflections. There are many surfaces in a concert hall that sound reflects off of, and these reflections reflect again, so there can be multiple reflections, so that the number of reflections increases exponentially over time. And of course, sound is traveling at the speed of sound, so it doesn't take long for many reflections to occur. Typically, we model reflections or reverberation in two parts. There are what are called early reflections that are best modeled with discrete delays because there are not too many and they can be very salient to the ear. So, for example, the time it takes for the early reflections to arrive gives us some clue as to the size of the room. Late reflections become very dense, and there are just far too many of them to model them as discrete delays. And so often these are modeled using a network of all-pass and feedback delay filters. Sometimes low-pass filters are added into the network because high frequencies are absorbed by the air and by room surfaces, and so this low-pass effect can be apparent in the reverberation. We measure reverberation time from the input of a sound into the room until the reverberation has decayed to about 1/1000th of the input amplitude, which is minus 60 decibels. And so we label this time as the RT60, reverb time. And a typical RT60 is 1.5 to 3 seconds in a concert hall. The impulse response looks like this. Recall that impulse response is when you put an impulse into a filter. That it can be something like a clap or a gunshot or popping a balloon, something that puts out essentially instantaneous pulse of energy. And if we look at how that evolves over time, we see, first of all, the direct sound reaches the listener after some time delay. So here we show that as about 25 milliseconds, indicating perhaps the listener is seated about 25 feet from the stage or the source of the impulse. And then we start to get early reflections. These are reflections of the impulse off of the floor, the ceiling, the wall, whatever's close by. And as these early reflections continue to build up and become very dense, we have a period called fused reverberation, where there are literally millions of paths of reflected sound that are too dense to think of as discrete reflections. And the general shape of the fused reverberation stage is an exponential decay. And so generally this continues to decay essentially forever, but when it's about 60 dB down, it becomes almost inaudible. If we want to build an artificial reverberator, we use some building blocks to do that. And one of these is feedback delay or comb filter, which we saw before. The other building block is an all-pass filter that looks like this. Samples are coming in. There's a delay, and there's some feedback that's being added, and then there's also this forward path with a gain of minus G, and so on. This has the effect of not changing the spectrum at all, but adding a fair amount of delay to the signal, well, depending on the value of D. And a very famous artificial reverberation design for digital reverberation was done by Schroeder. And so the Schroeder reverberator has a set of comb filters which will color the sound. They're not all pass As you remember, the comb filters put peaks into the sound, but we use a number of comb filters so that we're not imposing a single harmonic boost to frequencies. We sum up all of these comb filters and pass that through a couple of all-pass filters with different delays, and we get an output. You can do better than Schroeder reverberators, and there are many, many different reverberation system designs. Some are trying to be more faithful to physical reality. Some are designed to be very efficient, like the Schroeder design. Some are designed for ease of setup and specifying parameters. But we'll look at a couple of ideas. One is that if you want to model early reflections, which is important for simulating a particular room or a particular quality of room, then you can actually explicitly model these delays. Just you get a delay line and you tap that delay line, scaling each tap by some amplitude scale factor, and you sum all of these initial delays, reflections, into a global reverberator that looks kind of like the Schroeder reverberator. So the global reverb gives you the dense reflections through these feedback all-pass filters and comb filters, and but the discrete early reflections are modeled explicitly. Another thing you can do is put low-pass filters into the feedback loops, even within the all-pass filter or within the comb filter. That changes the nature of the filter, but it might make better reverb. People design more elaborate all-pass filters, sometimes with variable delay. There are also multi-channel designs for reverberators, so lots of flexibility. In Nyquist, we have some simple reverberators. One of them is if you load reverb.lisp, you get a function called reverb that takes a sound and a reverb time. This is the RT60. And it's pretty simple, but it's not a bad reverb. I've used it in a number of cases, and I wouldn't want to use it where the reverberation itself is extremely exposed, but if you're doing a light amount of reverb, I think it's perfectly fine. When you use it, you shouldn't just take the output alone. You should mix the reverb with the original or dry signal. So here's a typical function. Feel free to copy this. This is a reverb mix, and it takes a sound, the reverb time, and a parameter called wet, which is how much of the reverb signal do you want. And what it does is it just returns a mix of the input sound and the reverberated sound. There are some other reverb primitives in Nyquist that are just alternate designs. They're variations on the basic Schroeder reverb, but you can look into these as well. Another way to build reverberators is with convolution. Reverberators can be seen as just very big filters, very long impulse response. It's very irregular. So many modern reverbs measure the impulse response of real rooms and concert halls. And in fact, they often measure 4 impulse responses for stereo. So there's stage left channel response, stage left, right channel response, stage right, left channel response, and stage right channel response. So we're measuring the impulse response from 2 different positions on stage to 2 different recording microphones. Once you've measured this impulse response, you may recall that completely characterizes a linear filter. And if you convolve the input with the impulse response, you get the output of the filter. So this is a rather direct implementation of reverberation to model almost any room. And this can be done with a fast convolution algorithm, which involves using FFTs. It's still pretty expensive, but it's something that modern computers can do in real time. So to summarize, we've talked about many different audio effects. There are many more, so please keep reading the Nyquist reference manual and looking for interesting things. Look at the demos that are available in the demos directory of the Nyquist release. Audio effects are crucial in modern music production, not just for computer music, but for acoustic music recording. It's inevitable that people will use equalization, artificial reverberation, and sometimes some more interesting effects like time stretching and pitch shifting and so on. We talked about reverberation, and reverberation is just the effect of essentially millions of echoes piling up and becoming very dense to where you no longer hear discrete echoes. And these dense echoes generally decay exponentially with time. And artificial reverberation gives you a way of simulating that, controlling reverb time. It's a very useful effect. And in fact, I would say if you are not applying any reverberation to your computer music productions and compositions, you should probably look into it.